Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, no, good morning. We're still in the morning time. We just had to do a little break in the middle of the morning. So, of course, usually when we do that, it was because it's lunch. But no, we're here. We're back. It's 11:35. Now we are on to item number 5, which is our legislative session. This is day 26 continued, and this is call of bills for final reading. And so in front of us, we have Bill 27-19, Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, Racial Equity and Social Justice Advisory Committee established. The Government Operations Committee recommends enactment with amendments. And before we get into the conversation about the amendments and everything that we did in our GO session, I want to thank all my colleagues for really sticking with this process from the very beginning, something that we launched in January of this year. But actually, the previous council had taken action on a resolution that I introduced along with then Council Member Mark Elrich, and it was unanimously, was co-sponsored by all my colleagues and unanimously adopted. English is my second language, I have to remember that. That called for the establishment of a racial equity and social justice policy. And so what we did was affirm our commitment to do that, and now we are here after an entire year to pass legislation. So I really do want to thank my colleagues for all of their the time that they have invested in getting us to this particular point. I also need to thank personally my staff, Rolani Galua, Berta Sersosimo, Craig Wilson, Ben Price, and Mayra Cruz Solis, for putting up with me during this whole entire time, but really being central in getting us to this point. It's been really amazing to work with Team Navarro. Dr. Elaine Bonner-Tompkins, for all her hard work. She is someone that I immediately knew had to be a lead for this particular effort, because she has been working on these issues for such a long time through her capacity on the Office of Legislative Oversight, you know, really looking into a lot of super important areas and disparities and giving us that data and really informing us and supporting us through a lot of the work when it comes to issues of disparities and it comes to issues of gaps and things of that nature. So she was instrumental in getting us to this point as well. Tiffany Ward, who actually was here as an analyst for then Councilmember Elrich, but now as the Equity Program Manager, also was instrumental in this work. This has been an amazing teamwork. Of course, our attorney, Bob Drummer, who took all of this input, this feedback, all of that information, and really put it into the format of legislation. And really, I really have enjoyed working with him, not just on the original bill, but also as we work through the amendments and that were adopted through the GO session. So I really appreciate that. We also established partnerships with Leadership Montgomery. So C. Marie Taylor was really wonderful to work with, as well as the Racial Equity Institute, and putting forth these workshops that we attended. Actually was the leadership of the county. We started in January. We finished just a couple of weeks ago, and really delved deep into a lot of the issues, the historical context, a lot of just rooted history that has not only established and put forth the social construct of race and racism as an economic tool, but also then looking at our community here in Montgomery County, a community that is so diverse, which you cannot, even with all of these workshops, begin to understand all of the nuances, that history, the consequences, the persistent institutionalized structural issues that affect all of us because we're not homogeneous. And so it was, I think, though, really important, and I appreciated participating in those workshops because not only did it, I think, highlight that history, but it also, I think, reinforced for many of us this notion of how connected we are. not only here in the county, but from all the different places that we come from where all our ancestors came from. And so it was a very, I think, important frame. I really, really appreciated that. I do also want to, of course, acknowledge that, we held 3 really large community conversations where over 1,000 people participated, and it was a real snapshot of our community, and that was really exciting because we developed a toolkit. Many other conversations took place in different neighborhoods and organizations, and that was really awesome. The MORE Network, which is a coalition of a lot of organizations that we have worked with for many, many years, also came together and really were very deliberate in looking at the original bill and offering some amendments that we really, truly appreciated. I also want to thank the Latino Health Initiative as well as the African American Health Program for highlighting some other issues and bringing forth and validating some pieces that we needed to address as well. So I want to say that this has been, really awesome. And I particularly love the participation of our young people. So there was a youth town hall that the former member of the Board of Education student member hosted. But you know what? Also during our own youth town halls, this issue has been brought up. And our young people are very energized. And of course, right now, there's a lot of conversation as the school system undertakes boundary change studies. So we know that this is now an issue and a topic that is central in many of the things that we discuss. So let me say that on November 14th, the GO committee held a work session to go over the bill and make amendments. The work session was really a follow-up to what I just mentioned, not only the community conversations, but 2 public hearings where we had over 43 speakers. As I said before, I'm still really in awe of how everybody continues to stay engaged and still working on so many of these particular issues. I do want to emphasize that as I was thinking about this day on my way here, the word instrument kept coming up for me because this is what this is. This legislation is an instrument. It is what can allow your local government to, in a disciplined fashion, have before us data that will help us make decisions that can then begin to the very patient structural work of dismantling many of those structural barriers that have led to these disparities. This is not the answer to everything that we are facing in this county. And I have heard a lot of feedback, and one particular one was interesting. Somebody said to me, it was a reporter that said, well, there's this particular professor that says that Montgomery County is so progressive, you really don't need legislation because we're like so great. And I said, yeah, we are, but obviously if we were so great, then, and if these things were so easy to solve, we wouldn't still have the disparities that we have. So this is an instrument to begin that process. So in that sense, I know for a lot of people, it's still kind of odd to wrap your head around what this is. But I think that this is a way for us as government to do our part. Government cannot do everything. Obviously, we have to work together. We all have to pitch in, whether it's just, community members, nonprofit organizations, the private sector, et cetera. But this is an instrument that we can use to equip us to better address these issues, both legislatively and through budgetary decisions and through initiatives, et cetera. So I wanted to make that point. I also want to say that just as a point of personal privilege, there was a professor when I was a sophomore at the University of Missouri-Columbia, Lois Bryant, and one of the very few African-American professors at that time, who opened my eyes to a lot of this work. And, in her memory, I just want to say that I dedicate this work, this day, to her, because there are some people that come into your life and really change you forever. And I have to say that she was one of those people who took the time to do that, and I so much appreciate that. I want to also bring up a few items before I go into the specifics of what we did. We did receive some communication. This is an exciting time, actually. Thank you. That's a good segue. That's a good segue into what we're going to say.
Wow.
I do want to address some specific issues. So we did receive some feedback around concerns that health was not mentioned in the bill. But I wanted to make sure that everybody knows that it is mentioned in the bill as very prominently on lines 26 to 29 of the bill. It is specifically mentioned as one of those disparities that we need to address. And so basically, if you look at line 28, it says, these disparate outcomes among county residents include wealth, housing, criminal justice, education, and health. So it is there. Also, I just want to remind us that there is an HHS member that is suggested as part of the advisory committee. So for both, especially our health initiatives and programs that have worked so hard, I just want to make sure that everybody knew that, of course, this is front and center, because this is one of those disparities that we've been working on for so long, and therefore just wanted to make sure everybody knew that. We also received some feedback in terms of having the Office of Human Rights as part of the advisory committee. And the one thing I would mention is that we did have a conversation, as we were looking at the bill. There are two issues that I like to just point out. One is that our Office of Human Rights, of course, we rely on that office to enforce a lot of different particular issues that we have adopted through legislation. We've made them the enforcement, department. So there's that piece in terms of having a little bit of that firewall. But I will also say that the bill is not static in terms of who should be the members of this committee. It is static in terms of how many public members should be, but it's at the discretion of the executive through regulation whether he would like to make a change, in a year and rotate the different departments, et cetera. So that can be up to the discretion, but I just wanted to also mention that one of the main reasons was because this is an office that also deals with a lot of enforcement issues related to many of these topics. So I wanted to address that. And also in terms of the composition of the advisory committee, it does also state that on lines 205 to 212, that it must reflect the range of ethnicities, professional backgrounds, socioeconomic status, and places of origin to reflect the racial, economic, and linguistic diversity of the county's communities, with an emphasis on those most disproportionately impacted by inequities. And so, and each member should have some experience in redressing disparate impacts based on race and social justice issues. There was further suggestion that came to us after the GO committee session, asking that we put in a requirement that all the advisory committee members be residents of the county. What I am offering is that the public members should be residents of the county, because it could be that, that we might have a director of a department or somebody who's an expert but may not be a resident of the county, and we want to take that, take advantage of that expertise. But I think that having public members of the committee as county residents is something that I think would be very worthwhile doing. So that I've asked Mr. Drummer to draft language to that effect. And lastly, I will also say that as we go through the packet, something that also came after the GO committee session, were also some slight amendments to concerns raised by the LGBTQ community, and Councilmember Glass has some language to address that. So with that, I will just kind of go over what we did at the GO committee, and then of course we'll get into a conversation and Mr. Drummer can clarify anything else. So the bill as amended is going to establish a racial equity and social justice program. It's going to establish an Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice in the executive branch with a non-merit head. It removes the Chief Equity Officer position in the Office of the Executive as a non-merit position. That is because there's already a position that has been budgeted, so we didn't want to have duplication. It requires the executive to adopt by Method 2 regulation a racial equity and social justice action plan for the county. And that just means that the council also has an opportunity to take a look at that regulation and have an opportunity to opine whether this is something that we believe we should go further, or whether there should be some amendments. Require racial equity and social justice training of some type for all county employees, and that was one of the amendments. It was important that it would be all employees. Before it was just managers. We don't prescribe, of course, in legislation how that training should be offered, because that will be something that the executive would decide through regulation. But there are very many different ways that this can take place, and so we felt that it should be for all county employees. Require each department and office to develop a racial equity and social justice action plan. Require the Office of Legislative Oversight to submit a racial equity and social justice impact statement to the council for each bill, and invalidate a non-expedited bill enacted without an impact statement. So this was one of the amendments that I put forth in the committee, because this way it is our Office of Legislative Oversight who is responsible for the impact notes for legislation. For budgetary or initiatives, that would be the responsibility of the executive branch. And in this way, we did note that it would invalidate a non-expedited bill enacted without an impact statement. The fact that it is the Office of Legislative Oversight gives us a little bit more control to make sure that that statement is actually received, because you don't want the unintended consequence of not having a statement and then a bill being invalidated, and all kinds of interesting things could happen. Require the executive to explain how each management initiative or program in the recommended budget would promote racial equity and social justice, and that speaks to the fact that his his side of the aisle would address issues when it comes to budgetary and any initiative, etc. Establish a Racial Equity and Social Justice Committee with 8 public members, and this was something that it was recommended by the MORE Network, that we should increase the number of public members. 7 members representing county departments or agencies, and establish the duties of the committee. Authorize a $2,000 annual stipend for the 8 public members of the committee. And this was another recommendations for the MORE Network, recognizing that we want to be able to hear from a cross-section of our county residents. There may be residents where it might be prohibitive to participate if they don't have some kind of stipend of sorts to pay, maybe for transportation or for childcare or for whatever it is. So this was something I think that as we talk about recognizing who we are as a county, we need to adapt also and facilitate those kinds of participation. It is oftentimes, we have heard time and time again how only certain people can take the time to participate because, they have access to transportation, or they may have the means to do certain things. So this was, I think, a good recommendation and a good compromise. Instead of, having compensation like we do in some other quasi-judicial committees or advisory boards, this is a stipend, not necessarily, like a salary. Require the planning board to consider racial equity and social justice impact when preparing a master plan. Require the council to ensure sufficient funding for the program. And that particular one was also, emphasized by many of the community members, that we needed to make sure that the funding was there. I suggested, just like we did with the economic impact statement bill, with the Inspector General bill, where we strengthened the Office of the Inspector General, that we included there, so it's clear that this is the intent of the council. But we know that the charter states that everything is subject to appropriation. So even though it is included, and even though it is to signal, it is important that we know that that's what the charter calls for. So this is not a guarantee, but it's definitely something, of course, that we want to commit to. And then delay the effective date of the provision requiring an impact statement for each bill until August 1st, 2020. So the bill has an effective date, it's 90 days, but we are delaying the requirement for the impact statement for each bill, because we have to understand that we're gonna, we need to put the funding in place. Then people that are going to have to be hired need to be put in place. And so we didn't want to set it up where we're getting overly excited and ambitious, and then it turns out that when you look at the logistics of the implementation, to have staff in place, we would be violating the bill. So we decided, let's do this because we do know that we're going to engage in an operating budget process, and that we're going to have folks who are going to have to be identified and going to have to be hired. So that was a compromise in terms of this particular issue. That, I think, covers what the GO committee did. I know there were some technical amendments, et cetera, that we also took into consideration. So with that, let me turn it over to Mr. Drummer to see if there's anything that I sort of totally missed, and then we'll get into the discussion with my colleagues.
No, you hit all the points of the bill. You did mention 2 possible amendments that need to be moved and voted on.
Correct. Okay, great. All right, let me turn over to Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to move a motion to amend the definitions of social justice on lines 62 to 66 and 162 to 166.
Second.
Okay.
So, just real quick, the reason I have asked for this amendment, and I'll just read the amendment real quick, which is further clarifying the good work that the GO committee did to make this bill as inclusive as possible. And the amendment language is the social justice means that everyone deserves to benefit from the same economic, political, and social rights and opportunities regardless of race, socioeconomic status, age, sex, including on the basis of gender identity or orientation, religion, disability, or other characteristics. And we know that language is important. It helps define who we are, how we identify, and it can often also be liberating and help with our dignity, and language is always evolving as well. So thank you for that.
All right. So why don't, I know I have a lot of lights, so I want to make sure that we are taking up this particular amendment. So Councilmember Jawanda, do you want to? Right. So I just want to make sure, are you next? So do you want to speak to this amendment, or could we do this without objection?
Yeah, I was going to second, but yeah.
Well, you seconded, so you've been noted. All right, without objection? Okay, it passes without objection.
Good.
All right, so Councilmember Jawanda.
Thank you, Council President, and the first part of what I wanted to say is thank you to you. Your leadership throughout this process. I think those of us who are new members, we're really blessed to have you shepherd us through. I'm personally honored to be on this council with all 8 of you and to be moving this forward in our first year. I think it's something that we said we were going to do. We did it with fidelity. We listened to the public, and it's a really great step. So I want to just congratulate and thank you for your leadership. It's a great day for Montgomery County. It's a great day for Maryland that we're taking this step forward in making more of a reality that everyone here in our county, regardless of who they are, can get one step closer to realizing the promise of Montgomery County. This county is a great place for so many and offers so much. I've been here my whole life, but I've always been very aware, as many residents have, that many of the things that we love about this place, whether it be a great education or access to health care or housing that's habitable and affordable, have been just out of the grasp of so many for such a long time. And that's not unique to the nation, but here in Montgomery County, we rightfully hold ourselves up to a higher standard. And this is a really major step forward that's going to help us to erase those disparities and make that promise of Montgomery County, the promise of America, more real for everybody here. I also want to say that this legislation will create a framework and, to the Council President's language, an instrument that will allow us to assist in dismantling the historic and structural legacies of slavery and discrimination of all types, and remove those barriers so all can have a true opportunity to achieve their full potential. And while it's a framework and an instrument, in and of itself, it won't get the job done. We are going to, as a council, these offices that will be set up, the staff that will be hired, are going to need the continued engagement and support and pushing of the advocacy community and residents at large. And that's the main point I wanted to make today, that it's nice that we're passing it. It's an important step. It creates infrastructure. It puts real teeth and money and a commitment and a strong plan behind what we need to do. But it won't mean what we want it to mean if that when we come in next year, that we don't continue to have the advocacy community who has been so helpful and the residents to continue to hold us accountable. Once we receive these impact statements, we can look at them, but we must act upon them. And that's my charge to myself and to my colleagues and to the entire government and administration and the community, that we stay engaged, that we don't celebrate this only. We should celebrate it, but not celebrate it and then go home. We celebrate it, we take a little rest for the holidays, and then we come back and we start the really hard work of looking at these disparities in the face and saying we're going to have to change things. And that's hard. Change is hard. And doing things different is hard. And I commit to you to do that. And I know the Council President and my colleagues commit to that, but we're going to need your engagement to help us along. And the last thing I wanted to say is there's been some discussion about should we focus on racial disparities only, and should we not include the social justice elements in other communities that have been impacted. And that is a fair discussion, but this bill from the start has been about racial equity and social justice. And we took our time and we're deliberate about adding the definition and correcting the definition of social justice. And I think that's important in who we are as Montgomery County, that we rightfully do both of those things. That being said, when I look at the infant mortality rate in Montgomery County, when I look at the black mothers 65% more likely to die and lose an infant, that's something that this process will bring forward, and we're going to have to address that specific issue. So I want to assuage those concerns that we are not fully focused on racial equity. We are, but we can walk and chew gum. And there's intersectionality on so many of these issues. For the black trans woman who are dying at high rates, that's a racial equity issue. That's a gender identity issue. It's a social justice issue, and we're going to address that with the same vigor as we address black mothers who die too soon. So I just want to say that publicly, and that we all commit to doing that. And that's why it's important that we included both these things. So again, to the Council President, to my colleagues, I'm proud to be a part of this council. I'm proud that we're doing this in the first year, and I look forward to the work ahead.
Thank you, Councilmember Jawando. Thank you for also addressing that particular issue. I know that this was also discussed widely, and as I also mentioned to some of the advocates that came to meet with me, I think that obviously from myself as an elected official, I think what I would want my elected leaders would be to be holistic. But the real key here is that this is a data-driven process. So it doesn't mean that we get to pick and choose or arbitrarily pick and choose, because the data will speak for itself, and it will then force our hand, hopefully, to address what we need to address. So that's why this is structural in nature, and it is not a subjective piece of legislation, which is why, again, when I spoke to the activists, I said, I feel comfortable that we can address the issues that we must address as leaders for such a large county with so many different issues at the same time. It would be great if we could have the luxury of saying, let's address this particular population and these particular issues, and when we're done with that, then we'll move to this other one. But we don't have the luxury of doing that. And I think it would be irresponsible for us to proceed that way. So I feel comforted that because it is data-driven, that wherever there are disparities that disproportionately affect one group, that will, be revealed, and that we would have to then be held accountable to addressing that. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President, and I echo the sentiments of thanks to you for your leadership in this great work. It has been tremendous, and it is groundbreaking, and certainly is going to make a tremendous difference in the lives of thousands and thousands of people here in Montgomery County, so thank you for that. I did just want to highlight two issues. One, which is more simple, is just a We are now embarking upon, which I think is something that, from a policy perspective, is certainly something that's new for us in paying people to be on our boards and commissions. I will say that as a member of the Health and Human Services Committee, certainly there are many of our boards and commissions who actually ask a lot of the people who participate in them. And so if we are going to change, I've actually asked my staff to look at creating legislation that would actually do this for a myriad of boards and commissions. If we are serious about this changing of policy, I think that it's appropriate that we treat all of our boards and commissions the same, and we don't separate the two of them. So I'm not going to object to that. I think that if we're going to head in that direction, then I think that we should do it for all. My next point is one where it's actually a motion, and so what I'd like to do, I do understand and I saw where health was mentioned as a part of the findings, but I do think that it needs to be a part of the social justice construct, and so from that perspective, what I'd like to move is that on line 64, following the phrase that says, the same economic, political, and social rights and opportunities, I'd like to put a comma and then put free from health disparities, then an additional comma, then go with the rest of the sentence that says regardless of race, socioeconomic status, age, et cetera, that's been amended by Councilmember Glass to refer to the gender piece as well, taking that out and putting in sex instead. So I'd like to move that. Again, it would say right after opportunities, it would say, comma, free from health disparities. And so that would apply for all of our folks who we know continue to be challenged with health disparities, and make sure that social justice does have that in definition, that we do talk about that as well. And so I'd like to move that at this point.
Can you tell me again which line that was?
Yeah, that would be on line 64, where it says same economic, political, and social rights and opportunities, followed by free from health disparities, and then regardless of race, socioeconomic status, et cetera, et cetera.
So I don't have a problem with that. Obviously, when we talk about, social rights and opportunities, it was all encompassing, because education is also another piece. So we didn't want to go down the road of having to mention everything, but it doesn't hurt to highlight this, and it will, I think, appease a lot of the advocates. So without objection? Yes. Okay. Also,
Just a point
yes.
of technical, the definition of social justice appears on lines 162 as well. So if you make the change there,
Yes.
you'd want to make it in both.
to make it consistent. Yep. And I do want to also mention that, this conversation about the stipend and applying to other groups basically says that this legislation is already making a difference because this is the overarching framework. And what it means is that now we're going to have to take a look at things like this, at how do we, as a county that says and expresses the desire to hear from everyone, how do we facilitate that? So it's a small victory already for the legislation we haven't passed, which is really cool. All right, Councilmember Albornoz.
Well, Madam President, I want to thank you so much for your leadership. What you have accomplished in your personal and professional career has really been leading to this moment, and an important one, and I just so proudly stand next to you and all of my colleagues as we advance this forward. And the word that kept coming to mind as we were having this discussion over this first year was really dignity. Dignity to ensure that we address those complex and historical issues that prevent all of us from reaching our full potential. And I will say that this will be a critically important tool for our departments moving forward, but also a compass. Organically, departments, and I can say this as the former director of the Department of Recreation, try to ensure that there is equity within the provision of programs and services. And I'll give you two examples. During the horrible recession of 2008 and 9, all departments and this council had to make some very difficult decisions when it came to budget reductions. And there was a time in Montgomery County where there were after-school programs in every single middle school in Montgomery County. We haven't gotten back to that time yet, But the reductions that were made in such a way that Title I schools retained the funding to continue those middle school after-school programs, and the funding within the more affluent schools went away. That was done because it was the right thing to do. That was done because of the leadership of this council and our former county executive, but that was not in law. And this will ensure that future councils and future county executives take into account important measures like that as they make difficult decisions. But also from an opportunity standpoint, again, using recreation as an example, we have extensive summer camp options across this entire county. But when you look at the menu of services, despite our best efforts to date, there still is disproportionately more camps because many of those camps are revenue-based in more affluent communities in our county. And so this will help us ensure moving forward that within departments such as recreation or libraries or health and human services or corrections, across the board, that this tool and this compass ensures that from a practical standpoint, we are always, always taking this into account. And so I applaud your tremendous leadership, and I just so proudly stand alongside my colleagues as we move this forward. And this is a good day in Montgomery County. As many of you have heard me say many times before, and I'm going to say it many more times in the future, we all succeed when we all succeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Friedson.
Well, thank you so much, Madam President. I want to echo all of our colleagues for our gratitude and appreciation for your leadership on this issue and on so many other issues. I'm really proud to be here in this role at this moment, at this time, and proud to be working on such an important endeavor and to have been on the committee that was able to oversee it under your leadership as well. I think, as I've said before, this is a reflection of the fact that institutional problems require institutional solutions, and that's really what we're doing here. It's not to say that nothing has been done to address these issues before. It's to say that they are so deep-seated that they require an institutionalized mechanism in order to address them, which I think is an important aspect of what we're doing here. And we know and recognize that this doesn't right every wrong, as the council president mentioned. It doesn't solve every issue, particularly with something as vexing, as deep-seated, as challenging, and as damaging as racial inequity. But just because we can't solve everything doesn't mean that we shouldn't address anything. And we have to start with creating a system and a process in place, and that's really what this effort to me is all about, to create a framework, to establish a structure for the way that we do our work here at the council and here in the county. I'm really proud to serve in this role, to be able to be here, to work with each and every one of you as colleagues, to work with so many folks in the community who have taken this up, who led the community conversations themselves, not just the large ones that the council and the county executive hosted, but the smaller ones in living rooms and in community centers and in different places all throughout the county. It really was a community-led effort that the council president facilitated, which I'm really appreciative of as well. And I think, as Councilmember Albernaz mentioned with his one of his favorite lines, which I appreciate, I think this is really important that we reject the false choice zero-sum game, that when we lift certain people up, we have to do it by tearing other people down. And I don't think that that's ever been how it has worked. When we lift people up, that helps the broader community, and that's what this is all about as well. And so I appreciate the when we all succeed, we all succeed. I appreciate the idea that we're going to reject false choices and zero-sum games that create a mindset that we're competing against each other and not joining together as a community. And I am just really proud to be able to vote for this, to be able to have worked on this, and to be able to serve with each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Council Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Let me
I was going to say, let me be the first person to congratulate you, but I don't think my colleagues would go along with that for some reason. But thank you so very much for all your work on this piece of legislation and many others. You know, this legislation has had a great impact on Montgomery County, without question. But it really has, for me as well, on a very personal level. I know you have heard me say time and time again that I was raised in Montgomery County and went to Montgomery County Public Schools, and I was actually in the first year that the schools integrated in Montgomery County in 1956 when they did it in the Up County. And that certainly had a great impact on me in my personal life, and it truly has had an impact on my life in many other ways. I mean, I have literally lifelong friends who I would not have had, or certainly not as we would not have been as close if it weren't for the schools being integrated. But this goes so much further than my personal friendships. This is, and I know you've heard me say this many times, that I always have believed that a community is a family. And today, and just like you treat your family, you treat each one equally, you love each one equally, and today, truly the family is extremely proud that we're doing the right thing. But I do have two amendments, or two that you had discussed earlier, Madam President, that when the first one is to amend lines 202 to 204 to really only say, and everybody can turn to them, to really only say the committee must have 15 voting members. 202 to 204. Well, it's saying on the rest of that, I mean, not to be confusing, but it says, the rest of it says at least 8 of the voting members must be appointed and either reside in or be an employee of the county, and that's going to be changed for the next amendment that I'm about to make.
Right, so, can I see that?
Yeah, yeah.
I just didn't want to move it because I'm president, so I'm supposed to move. So, so this is, this is what, Mr. Drummer, what you developed, the language to address the fact that the public members should be residents of the county. Because there was a particular request, to do that.
Right.
So the committee must have 15 voting members.
And then you go into the next.
Yeah, and then, right, and then that is lines 202 to 204. And then amending lines 228 to 230, that 8 members should be a public member with experience in redressing disparate impacts based on race and social justice issues, and each public member must, when appointed, reside in the county. So I think that can be done with one amendment, right?
Can it be done with one, or can it be done? Yeah, it can be done with one amendment. It would make each of the public members to be a resident of the county.
Correct.
And the members that are appointed because of their position, there would be no requirement that they be a
So
resident.
just a question, are you striking then at least 6 of the voting members must, when appointed, either reside in or be an employee of the county?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And
And adding in
I just
the
want to make
8.
sure I understand. Perfect.
And according to Mr. Drummer, we can do it all at once. So it would read, the committee has 15 voting members, and 8 members should be a public member with experience in redressing disparate impacts based on race and social justice issues. Each public member must, when appointed, reside in the county. The only question is, when you're saying must when appointed, if they move out of the county, would that mean that we should say when appointed, be in the county and remain in the county? If they move out, this is giving them a leeway for somebody to move out of the county, I would think.
Yeah, it does, but, if you say you must be a resident, then, at all times, then I guess if you
I would
move out
think
of the
that would
county,
be-
you're automatically going to be off the committee, and I didn't know if you wanted to do that.
Well, I believe if you want someone to be in the county, then they should be in the county. I don't know where anybody else is on that, but I believe that.
I would then take out when appointed and just say each public member must reside in the
Yeah.
county.
I would just say,
Yeah.
just a clarifying question, are the other commissions, my understanding is you can finish your term if you were to move halfway through, you would be able to finish your term. But I just want to point out that we would make these different.
Yeah, but we're paying you on this one.
I get it.
Yeah,
I get it. I'm just clarifying that. I'm just making sure. Is that your understanding?
You know, for the $2,000 stipend, you need to stay here.
Clarify the clarification.
right,
I
so-
think it varies
One
throughout
second.
for boards and commissions. I think many of them do say when appointed on the theory that somebody moves, you don't want them to automatically be knocked out. But if you want them to automatically be knocked out and be disqualified, then I would just take out when appointed.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that covers what we're trying to do here.
Are you good?
Awesome. So it was moved by Vice President Katz and seconded by Councilmember Rice.
And
Without
clarified by
objection,
Mr.
with a
Cromer.
friendly amendment. Is that a good? All right. Yep.
Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you, Council President Navarro. Really appreciate your leadership in bringing this bill to the council and working it through over the course of this year. It's been a very productive process. This is a really important time to talk about race in America. We have a president of the United States who is an open racist, who has built his political coalition courting white nationalists, has espoused an agenda for his presidency that seeks to divide Americans very deeply along racial lines. And it's unprecedented in modern times at the level, but of course those types of initiatives have always been beneath the surface for decades. You have to go back a little further than that for it to be as open as it now is. I think that this initiative is partly a reaction to that. It's saying that race has to be an open and transparent conversation, and that we all have to have that dialogue, and it has to be an intentional part of government to bring people together and to acknowledge the historical forces that have created inequities, and to put in place measures that will improve those measures, improve those inequities. So I'm pleased to support it. I look forward. I think it gives us more momentum around crucial issues like workforce development and diversifying our tech talent pipeline so that all kids in this county have a chance to get the jobs that are created here in this region, to invest more in early education so that every family, no matter their income, has a great place for their children to learn from the very beginning and enter kindergarten ready to learn, to improve our police practices and ensure that our department is at the cutting edge of community trust and community engagement. All of these initiatives are strengthened thanks to having an intentional racial equity framework, and I'm pleased to support it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Reamer. Councilmember Hooker.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you for your leadership on this as well. I think everything's been said, and I agree with everything my colleagues have said. But as somebody who's been involved with social justice struggles in Montgomery County for 20 years this year, it's very interesting to be talking about the meaning of racial equity and the meaning of social justice here, and not in church basements in Tacoma Park, where we used to, or in meeting halls in Silver Spring with even some of the folks in the audience and many advocates that aren't here today, Dr. Robinson. It's very fulfilling to see this body taking up these concepts. 20 years ago, in 1999, these ideas were pretty far outside the mainstream of policy and politics in Montgomery County, and here they are being discussed and in the COB and ratified with legislation and with positions and with funding, and it shows we're a different group of people here, and we are taking this very seriously, and the county's it's a new day in the county. We've been moving in this direction, but today feels very important and makes my heart very happy to be here and feel very honored to be supporting it today. So thank you again.
Councilmember Rice.
So I just wanted to close by saying, because before my comments were mainly about business, about how personal this is, because I think about the young girl who came from Venezuela and who came here eyes wide open, thinking that she was going to be greeted with open arms and support. And while she got that from some, she didn't get that from everyone. And it really is something that's also identified with the young boy whose family is from Nigeria. These are things in which we all know, as we experience here, we've had these discussions for a very long time around our dinner tables. These weren't formalized in terms of meetings and commissions and membership on boards. These were conversations we had with our families. We had these conversations with our families about the talk, about how to interact, about how to be when it came to going into an interview, because you knew that the first time you walked in, you were black and people saw that, and you had to overcome that. When you walk in and you're Latina and folks automatically assume that you can't speak English and can't be professional. These are the things that unfortunately still exist today. So we haven't gotten to a place where we've eliminated these types of barriers, which is why this legislation is so important. And so I want to make sure that folks understand that the impetus for this is solely around the fact that while so much has changed, so much has stayed the same. And it is indicative of what you see with the president, but the president hasn't created something. The president has just awoken stuff that was already there that people felt but just didn't feel comfortable saying anymore. We'd gotten to a place where it was kind of not appropriate to say those kinds of things or act that certain way anymore. We had advanced our society enough to push those things into the shadows. They were still there. We know them because they rear their heads every time you have a person who's asked to move along just because they were standing outside of a McDonald's. Or we know that every time a person is called the N-word for no fault of their own, but based on the color of their skin. Or we know that it happens when we have a person who gets gunned down in our community and nobody cares. These things happen. And so this is the thing that's going to make it happen. And I just have to say on behalf of my community and my family, thank you, President Navarro, because you're making it a lot easier for me to not have to have those same kinds of conversations with my daughters. And I hope to God that they won't have to have the same conversations with their children. This is starting that work. And so I really thank you because it is life-changing.
Well, I so much appreciate that. I did also, before we vote, want to say that we are embedding this work in so many other strategic frameworks. And so today, we passed our economic development platform, and in that resolution, we clearly state that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland approves the 4-pillar economic development platform that is business-friendly and leverages our assets through continued investments. The desired outcomes of this platform are a thriving and diversified economy, racial equity and social justice, greater innovation, and environmental sustainability. And I wanted to say that because even though we know how important this is for the future of our county, the quality of life, the desired community that we want to be, it is also an economic issue because we are losing so much through the fact that there are so many disparities that rob the potential of so many in our county. And so this, while it is part of our responsibility as legislators, and for some of us is very personal, it should also be something that everybody needs to embrace because it speaks to the viability of the economy of our county as well. So I wanted to also say that, and again, thank my colleagues for kind of like sticking with me on this crazy ride that has been this year of putting into structural frameworks so many of the things that we have all worked on And the other thing I will say, and this is something that came up during some of the conversations that we held, is that as we passed and we celebrated a public election, campaign fund, this is also going to have an impact on civic participation in political campaigns, because it will not be enough to say that we care about diversity. We will have to make sure the candidates articulate exactly how they're going to address these issues. And so there are so many different ramifications to this action that I think would only make us a much better place to call home. So with that, this is a roll call vote.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Durando?
Yes.
Mr. Durando votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yeah.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Alpernos?
Yes.
Mr. Alpernos votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Feetson?
Yes.
Mr. Feetson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes. And this passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody. Woo-hoo. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Councilmember Rice?
I just had a matter of business, Madam President.
Yes.
I'd stepped away during the consent calendar. I'd like to just be recorded in the affirmative for that.
Thank you. All right, we're going to adjourn for
I would
lunch.
too.
Yes, and Councilmember Hucker as
Thank
well.
you.
All right, thank you, everybody. And do celebrate, okay? Thank you.